Thank you for joining us for our GA workshop, Delivering Human Services Around the World. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining us for Delivering Human Services Around the World. We will get started at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining us for our workshop. We will get started in just a few minutes. Thank you for joining us for our workshop. We will begin in just a couple minutes. Hello, thank you for joining us for our workshop, Delivering Human Services Around the World. We are going to wait just another minute to let folks into the room, and then we will get started. All right, welcome to our GA workshop, Delivering Human Services Around the World. Brad, let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brad Bell from Indianapolis. Welcome to the session, Delivering Human Services Around the World, Federation and agency partnership models. Thank you for joining us today. Recordings of this session and all other workshops will be available online after the GA ends. I hope you're planning to join us this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern for the Federation Together plenary. Challenge creates opportunity, and COVID is no different. The pandemic has significantly increased all kinds of critical communal needs, from food insecurity to unemployment to mental health issues. But it has also reinvigorated planning efforts and brought a new appreciation for the rewards of working together to meet our community's human service needs. This session will show the kinds of collaborative community planning efforts that usually takes place in the background. You'll see how 3 federations and their Jewish family service partner agencies work together to assess community needs, mobilize resources, and develop responses. You will also hear from one of our partners in Israel. I am pleased to welcome our speakers for this workshop. Linda Berger, CEO of JFS Houston, Danielle Hartman, CEO of Ruth Rails Jewish Family Services Raton, Yossi Heyman, CEO of JDC Israel Special Division, Todd Krieger, Senior Planning Director of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit, Perry Oren, CEO of JFS Detroit, Jessica Siegel, Chief Strategy and Planning Officer of the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston, and Dana Visner, Chief Planning Officer of the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County. Reuben Rotman, President and CEO of the Network of Jewish Human Service Agencies, will moderate the discussion. Reuben, take it away.
Thanks so much, Brad, and thank you all for joining us for this session. As Brad noted, the type of planning needed to address human service needs indeed does tend to take place in the background. Often the issues that Jewish human service agencies address are focused on the most vulnerable, the most at risk. These needs can make people feel uncomfortable, and as such, they don't always dominate community conversation. While it is the case that these agencies do indeed care for those who would be considered most in need, the agencies are also serving the full mainstream of the community. Certainly, the pandemic has been a great equalizer as the disruption of COVID has impacted us all. Mental health challenges, financial insecurity, increasing unemployment are all bringing new clients to these agencies. It is our hope that today's session might spark some communities to move the dialogue around human service challenges from the background to the foreground. And so first, to help frame our session, I wanted to offer a perspective from the Torah portion that we just read yesterday. This week's portion includes the story of Noah and the epic flood that God brought to the people. The flood was God's response to the strong need for a do-over. It was God's view that the people needed a wake-up call. The world was not a good place. God brought a flood and then offered a covenant with the people, a promise for the future. The symbol God chose for this covenant was a rainbow. When you think about a rainbow, many images come to mind, but I'd like to offer one perspective for us to consider. Mostly, a rainbow is not just one color. It could be as many as 7 colors, many different hues. It's difficult to see where one color ends and another begins. That diversity could also be reflective of community. Certainly, Jewish communities are not all the same, and the individuals and families that constitute those communities are also not all the same. It is the diversity of the community that gives it its strength. The federations, the organizations, the agencies, the synagogues, the lay leaders, and the professionals that support the community need to work together to identify and understand needs so they can move forward to strengthen and to sustain all members of the community, in a sense, to ensure the continuity of the covenant that God made with the people. So with this framing in mind, I'm pleased to be moderating today's session, which seeks to highlight the many different ways that federations and Jewish human service agencies work together to strengthen communities and to respond to critical needs. We will begin today's session with brief presentations from representatives of Federation agency partnerships from 3 communities, each of which have worked together to develop models of collaboration that have sparked innovation to address human service needs. As Brad noted, we have JFS agency representatives here with us today from Boca Raton, Detroit, and Houston, and each are here purposefully and will be presenting together with their Federation planning partners. The communities have been asked to prepare presentations that address a few key questions. First, to share how their Federation and agencies in each community works collaboratively to understand and address human service needs. To share an example of a service that was developed jointly pre-COVID, or BC, before COVID, and to share an example of a service that has been developed in response to COVID. Lastly, they will share their thoughts as to how the partnership between the Federation and the agencies has helped to ensure the sustainability of these services or the scope of the services that are provided. We will take some questions following the presentations, the 3 presentations, so please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. And then following the first panel, we will then have the good fortune to learn about comparable models that exist in Israel from Yossi Heyman, the CEO of the Eshel division of JDC Israel, which supports older adults in Israel. To begin our panel, we will first hear from Danielle Hartman, CEO of Rails JFS, and Dana Visner, Chief Planning Officer from the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County.
Thank you, Ruben, and thank you for inviting us to participate in this conversation. At the core of our collaboration is trust and friendship, built over years of working closely together. Prior to becoming the CEO of JFS, Danielle was Federation's chief planner. Her chief development officer was once the chair of our Federation's board of directors and a national young leadership cabinet chair. Our buildings are adjacent to each other, and in better days, it was easy to just drop into each other's offices without even needing to go outside. So it's fair to say that our organizations know and understand each other well. We share lay leaders and major donors, and we work together to support our community to the fullest extent possible. Federation relies on JFS to be the subject matter experts on social services needs, and we respect and appreciate the level of excellence that they bring to our community. Like with any family, things aren't always rosy and we sometimes disagree, but it is our trust in each other that allows for honest communication and the shared commitment to always do what works best to benefit our community. We invite each other to participate in relevant strategic planning efforts. Danielle collaborated and contributed to the questions on our demographic study a few years ago. Members of her staff were on our special needs task force, and I've joined the strategic planning initiative that they have now for seniors. This allows us to plan jointly for the community and to leverage the best of what both organizations bring to the table. And our JCRC works closely with JFS and other local agencies to advocate on a state and national level for our vulnerable populations, Holocaust survivors, seniors, and those with special needs. And most recently, at the onset of COVID-19, we worked together to raise emergency dollars and to allocate to the most urgent needs in our community. So now I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who will share a powerful example of our ongoing collaboration, and then I'll wrap up at the end. Danielle?
Thank you, Dana, and hello to everybody. Thank you for attending this session. So the example I'm going to give you is one that's a pre-COVID example, and then it's a post-COVID example. And we have so many, but for the purposes of time, we're going to focus on our Meals on Wheels program. So to give you some context, our Meals on Wheels program started in 2013. At the time, our Jewish Federation had completed a demographic study in 2008. And then because seniors were such a large portion of that study, they followed up 2 years later with a senior services study. And I'm sure no one would be surprised that one of the unmet needs in the senior category was access to food. At the time in our community, there was a wait list of several thousand seniors waiting to receive home delivered meals through the county. And while our JFS was not the lead agency, there is another lead agency serving our part of the county. There was no way that agency by itself was going to even be able to absorb the number of seniors who were on that wait list. At the same time, another agency in our community called JARC, the Jewish Association for Residential Care, had a desire through some of their own strategic planning to create a catering business. JARC is a nonprofit that serves adults with developmental disabilities. They have a day training program. They also do housing. So around that time in 2013, we had approached our federation based on the need for seniors to have kosher home delivered meals, based on the fact that we knew it was a priority unmet need for the Jewish community and our greater community. And so working collaboratively, the federation put up 1/3 of the startup dollars, Jewish Family Services put up 1/3 of the startup dollars, and we jointly identified and solicited a donor together, and they put up 1/3 of the startup dollars. And by the way, it is now named, but at the time, the donor who put up the third part of the gift was not Adele Loeb or Les Nachman. They were not even involved at that moment. And so the startup amount at that time was $60,000. So we were partnering with JARC. We had worked with Federation collaboratively, and that program got off the ground with, with 42 clients. And we were delivering about 200 meals per week, strictly using volunteers. And to this day, that program only uses volunteers to make deliveries. And many of those volunteers are actually both Federation or Jewish Family Service or other community members not affiliated with either of our organizations. The other thing was when we were setting up this program, thinking ahead and thinking about sustainability, we knew that there were many older adults in our community who wanted to have a kosher home delivered meal, but they weren't necessarily needing it for free. And so we developed, like most things at my agency, a tiered service where if you were an older adult, you could get meals delivered to you by a volunteer, and if you were able to pay for the meals, you paid for the meals. So through the years, as this program has grown, part of our ability to sustain it was that there was a fee generating component built into it. Then COVID-19 happened, and at the time, we quickly saw a huge surge. We had a 41% increase in requests for home delivered meals between April and May. And so again, working collaboratively with our federation and with our partner, the Jewish Association for Residential Care. And you can see on these pictures, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, this is a volunteer, obviously trying to socially distance to deliver her meals, because even to this day, throughout the pandemic, we still rely strictly on volunteers to make the deliveries. The photo on the left, you can see where we are right now, which is on a weekly basis, we're delivering over 1,000 kosher home delivered meals to over 200 seniors in our community, and many of them are Holocaust survivors. One of the reasons why we feel we saw this big jump was because as older adults limited the number of caregivers coming into their home, and as restaurants remained closed, and as shopping trips became less and less often, seniors still needed a way to get meals. So when we had that huge jump, at the time, JARC had refrigeration, but in order for them to absorb the additional meals that we needed to go from 600 meals a week pre-COVID to over 1,000 meals a week post-COVID, JARC and I approached Federation, and they actually provided temporary funding for temporary freezers while JARC had an extended freezer, and this is what you see in the bottom picture. We recently had a ribbon cutting because DARC was able to, with the Federation's help from some of the money they raised from COVID, to install a freezer that will now have the capacity to take up to 2,000 meals a week. So as we've grown the program, the community has grown together. And as I mentioned, now we have over 200 people on the program and are delivering over 1,000 meals a week. And before I pass it back to Dana, from our perspective, from Jewish Family Services perspective, we feel that the keys to our success are open communication, respecting opinions, even when we don't always agree, our collaborative spirit, our sense of transparency, and most importantly, our strong desire to meet the community's needs as they evolve. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dana.
Thank you, Danielle. It's really such a great example of agency collaboration. So thank you for sharing. In recent years, we've also collaborated on senior transportation and special needs initiatives, resulting in transformative changes in both areas. One interesting outcome in the area of special needs is a shared position funded by both organizations. It fills a gap in service that was identified through our strategic planning effort. She is a highly skilled social worker that is now on staff at both JFS and Federation, serving as a central resource to families. I think it's important to also note that our Federation's annual planning and allocation process, which is 100% program-based, is closely linked to our agency's priorities. With JFS, we know that their proposals are always for the highest priority programs and are budgeted to leverage every available dollar from multiple resources. This allows us to help sustain programs like Meals on Wheels year to year if needed. We also understand that things change, and if there are mid-year adjustments needed, our process can handle it. But it's not always easy. Our leadership at the table are incredible stewards of the process and take the rules very seriously. But with JFS, our trust and the excellence that they bring to the table make it easy to adjust and accommodate. In closing, our close relationship and shared campus leads to natural collaboration in typical times and in times of crisis. Whether it's hurricanes or COVID, our shared infrastructure lends itself to a unified response and Federation's ability to seamlessly support JFS's direct service to their clients. We are able to access our large volunteer and donor network, providing helping hands where they are needed and connecting the broader community to experience our shared impact. I'm so proud of our joint accomplishments and that the professional and lay leadership of both of our organizations understand the value of collaboration. We look for opportunities to boost each other up, which in the end strengthens the collective, resulting in the greatest impact to those that need us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we go from Boca to Detroit. I'd like to introduce Perry Oren, CEO of JFS Detroit, and Todd Krieger, the Senior Planning Director of the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. Let's hear about Detroit.
Thanks, Ruben. I'm going to just take a minute and share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. Great, thanks, Ruben. If anyone is having a challenge, please let us know. So Perry and I wanted to start with an African proverb that we think really sums up the work that we do here in Detroit. And the proverb is this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. When we think about collaboration in Detroit and we think about what makes us so successful, our secret sauce truly is that we understand in a very deep way that working together is going to get us farther. Working alone is just simply not going to achieve as much impact as working closely and deeply together. The other trick, I think, and I often refer to this as our secret sauce, is that we really like one another. We are truly friends. We often talk about our community really being a family. And when I describe what it's like working with Perry and the other agencies here in Detroit, it truly is a family environment. And so my advice certainly to any other communities that are trying to understand how can we collaborate most successfully, I think the key is to really get to know one another, have those deep relationships, because that ultimately will get you more success in the services and programs that you deliver. and it will truly allow you to achieve more. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 initiatives very briefly that were developed pre-COVID, and Perry is then going to talk about how those programs were extended or how they were tweaked or changed during COVID, and then touch on the impact of our work together. So in 2016, we did a community health and welfare needs assessment, and we learned some really interesting things. The first thing that we learned is that people were really struggling to understand where to get assistance. And so hand in hand with Jewish Family Service, we developed J-Help. And this is a website where people can go and learn about the different services that are offered in the community and do a lot of research. But perhaps more importantly, what they can do is very quickly and easily schedule a call with a representative in our Jewish Family Service Resource Center. And they can even chat in real time with someone there. So they're getting help very, very quickly. And that was a challenge we were having in our community. But when I think about how we developed the solution, JFS and Federation worked hand in hand, from the way the website looked, the look and feel, to the technology we used for chat. We knew that to be successful, we needed to work very, very closely together. And we still work on this very closely, from meeting to understand how many people are using the solution to understanding how we can do the work that we're doing together better. The other thing that came out of that 2016 assessment was some really surprising data about our young people. And what we learned is they were really struggling with sadness, anxiety, and depression. And I remember at the time we were seeing a lot on national news about this, but we didn't think that it had truly impacted our community or hit our community in the same way. And this data showed very clearly that it had. And I remember calling Perry when we got this data and talking to him and saying, well, we have to do something. And so we very quickly formed a work group. JFS has been a critical component of that work group. And we developed a plan that has 3 critical components. The first is education and awareness. The second is training. And the third is interventional or formal supports. And Jewish Family Service has been a critical component of making that program successful. While Federation has raised quite a bit of funding, while we have a team member in our organization who's leading that effort, Jewish Family Service is in many ways leading the training effort. We've been successful in training over 700 agency professionals on suicide awareness and prevention. And that's certainly because JFS has been there with us every step of the way. The other critical component of this program that I think shows a very deep level of collaboration is that we recognized very early on that the national shortage of child psychiatrists was evident in our community. And again, working closely with Perry, we were able to identify a funding source. They were able to use that funding to hire a child psychiatrist. And today in our community, you can be seen quicker at Jewish Family Service than you can at the hospital right next door. That's a significant achievement, I think, and it only would happen with us working very, very closely together. And we continue to work closely together, understanding the impact of that particular role and understanding the impact of the initiative as a whole. The last item I want to touch on is what we call the collaboratory. And coming out of that study, we really thought we needed to take a step back and truly understand what would make Jewish Detroit sustainable for many, many years to come. And there were some forces at that time that made us think that maybe the real estate footprint that we had, the number of agencies, the services that we were offering, potentially weren't the right ones. And so we kicked off this process of a variety of human service organizations coming together to talk about what Jewish Detroit should be and needs to be. And Jewish Family Service was a critical component of that, certainly very engaged in developing the process, in identifying the right facilitator, and making sure that that process that we went through was one that would be impactful. Today, Jewish Family Service and 2 other agencies are discussing realignment and potential merger. And that's only because I think we were all successful in developing an initial process that would lead to those kinds of conversations. I want to end, and I'll kick it over to Perry in a second, by talking about what's been important, I think, in that process. And I think a key part of collaboration isn't just understanding how to have a successful meeting or how to plan something together, but I think it's also understanding when one party maybe needs to take a step back and let the other party do more, or go along for a certain period of time alone. And that's been a critical part of the collaboratory, quite honestly, as Perry and his agency and a few others having the space to do the work alone they needed to do, and us to take a step back and say, okay, we're here when you need us and ready to re-engage and collaborate again. And so with that, I want to kick it over to Perry. He'll continue talking about these initiatives during COVID and the impact of our work together.
Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Perry Oren from Jewish Family Service. I want to start by saying that anybody could be in the seat that I'm in right now. In other words, any of my counterparts at my sister agencies in metropolitan Detroit would be saying the same thing about their relationship with Federation, not just Federation agency execs, but all Jewish agency execs. Point one. Since the pandemic, Federation initially convened daily huddles among Jewish leaders, not just Federation and Federation agency executives, but all Jewish leaders. Now they're weekly. We all attend them and we all work together to solve problems. They're very real. We look forward to them. Monday mornings at 9:30, you too can Zoom bomb them if you want to. Federation raises dollars. They understand that lane very well. Federation has raised over $7 million in COVID relief to help all Jewish entities in my neighborhood, not just Federation agencies, not just for this time period, but for the next year and the years moving forward as we all adjust to what the current pandemic means and what the pandemic's going to mean in the future. Federation literally and figuratively has said to all of us, our lane is fundraising and yours is where our rubber hits your road. Let us know what you need and we have got your back. And that is so true. And I'm echoing so much of what Todd has said so far. In light of what Todd said before about the We Need to Talk initiative, Federation has promoted and is paying for any community member to do Living Works suicide prevention training called START. Federation helped us more than double the amount, this is a play from Danielle from Boca's playbook, double the amount of kosher home delivered meals. And it's not even a program of Jewish Family Service, it's a program of the National Council of Jewish Women in my neighborhood, not a Federation agency. They helped us to double that. Jewish Family Service, of course, is intimately involved in that program, but it's not our program and it's not a Federation agency program. Federation has increased our J-Help resource, as Todd mentioned, enabling us to be much more J-helpful to our community. Federation has supported 3 local Jewish Human Service Agencies merger talks, as Todd discussed. Us, Jewish Family Service in Metropolitan Detroit, JVS Human Services, and Kadima. While this has not been a perfect process, what has been in COVID times, Federation has appropriately let us 3 go out on dates with one another while learning after the fact how the dates are going and wanting to be supportive of us in whatever way that might mean, which could mean throwing a wedding for us or buying putting a down payment on a house, so to speak. So that's collaboratory 2.0, and we're all doing this amidst a pandemic. And Federation, by the way, as we get closer to milestone votes, is appropriately leaning in more and more as the 3 agencies' dates, if you will, are going more successfully. I'll sort of end with a call I got Friday morning at 9:25, and it was Todd Krieger. And I picked up the phone and Todd said, and by the way, this is just an illustration and I'm not sure how this ends. This is me talking. Todd said, there's a donor who's talked to somebody at Federation and that donor wants to give some money. And I'm calling you, and he's probably calling other people as well. I'm calling you to see what are your current unmet needs. By 4:04 that afternoon, I got Todd an email with 7 possible unmet needs. And I'm not sure whether or not Jewish Family Service is going to be funded for any one of those or all of them. But what I do know is that happens somewhat regularly at 9:25 on any morning of the week. So that's our special sauce. Our impact as you're looking in front of us, we all could show outputs like you're looking at. Most of this is output. Some of it is satisfaction survey, 99%, not a bad number. but we don't do this. Jewish Family Service, JVS, Kadima, JARC, Yad Ezra, Jewish Senior Life, Jewish Hospice and Chaplaincy Network, Hebrew Philon, fill in the blank. We do not do this, whether we're a federation agency or not, without the largesse of federation and without the appropriate relationship that all of us are able to have with federation and trying to combat the community's needs and provide proper solutions. That's all I got. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you, Perry. Thank you, Todd. Before we go to Houston, I just want to remind everybody, if you've got questions, comments, reactions, please put them into the Q&A box, because we will take a few minutes to take some questions following the Houston presentation. So now we're going to travel down to Houston, or up or over, wherever you're logging in from. Linda Berger, CEO of JFS Houston, Jessica Siegel, Chief Strategy and Planning Officer of the Jewish Federation of Greater Houston. Thank you both.
Thank you, Ruben. And Jessica and I are so happy to be here with everyone. We knew that going last, a lot would be said about partnerships. And so I want to speak about one other piece that I think is really important, and that is the trust and the belief that begins at the top. So I'm very proud to be a Ruby Lion. 100% of my staff and my board support the annual campaign of the Federation. We believe in the Federation system. And the three examples we're going to talk to you about today are the most recent ones. There are so many that we could have highlighted. So these are the ones that we really want to share with you. Number one, promise of hope. Many years ago, we realized in our community that people were circumstantially poor and they were chronically poor, and that JFS by themselves could not raise the funds that were necessary to do the work, and that really the human service side of Promise of Hope was really what the local campaign would be about for the Jewish Federation. So we teamed together, and the Federation began running the campaign with us by their side. Together, we identified people who could donate, and together we worked on telling the story. And I have to tell you, it was a big surprise that in Houston, Texas, in 2012, there were people, Jewish people, who were poor. And we really effectively ran a campaign together. We began to serve everyone who needed help, and we began to serve as a bridge at JFS to those families to help them grow and thrive. One of the things that happened is that in 2015, we were hit by the first of 6 floods and then Harvey. And that changed everything. We decided together not to continue the Promise of Hope campaign fundraising because the needs in our community were immediate. And as I look at the photos that are in front of you from the floods, I have to say it still sends chills down my spine, because my family flooded 3 times too during the most recent years. And so this was a very real time. And not only did the Federation come together and spearhead what the community needed to do to respond, but the Jewish Federations of North America and the network of Jewish Human Service Agencies were key in helping guide us through the disaster that was Harvey. And I think that's a really important piece that we learned, because it's not raise the money one and done, but Promise of Hope and the hurricanes and the floods showed us that this is a long-term partnership where it's not just about the money, but it's about the mental well-being of the community and the members of it. And the Federation, with the guidance of JFNA, really saw that we needed to have a 5-year plan for how to respond to Harvey, not a 1-year, 2-year, or 3-year plan. So when COVID hit, we haven't been 5 years since Harvey. And when COVID hit, we already had the disaster team in place to focus on COVID in the same way we would have responded to an emergency flood. And all of that is because of the deep partnership we have with our Jewish Federation. And I don't know how we can do it. We're focused on delivering the services to thousands and thousands of people while the Federation is talking to donors and helping to put us in the place that we could do it. So that's really, really important. And as we focus on COVID, let me just say that just last week, we learned that what JFS asked for financially through the end of December of 2021 was unanimously supported by our Jewish Federation board and colleagues. And you can see a picture there where the PJ Library decided to have an event where families could bring relief for COVID. And they actually came to Jewish Family Service. All the PJ Library and Federation folks were there accepting the materials. And it just was a great example of making sure we had the supplies we needed, but that it was a full community effort. You can see in the bottom one, this Thanksgiving helped complete the promise. And that's because Promise of Hope isn't over. People still need our support. In fact, they need it more. Their mental well-being is the stress, anxiety, and depression that you're hearing about because of COVID has exponentially grown in Houston because we already had the trauma from much of the Jewish community having been through Harvey and some of the other floods. So Promise of Hope took a back seat, but we recognize that it's going to be part and parcel of what we do together as a federation and a JFS moving forward. I know there are quite a few sessions on poverty in the Jewish community throughout the GA, and I hope many of you will attend because we recognize that many members of our community are on the brink of being first generation in poverty, and we want to stop that trend and only have it be the people that are in trouble today and that we serve as the bridge together moving forward. Jessica, I want to turn over to you and let you add as well.
You heard most of it from Linda, but I think from our federation perspective, we could not do it either without JFS, because when we raise dollars, and these two campaigns that Linda really talked about are examples where we really were in it together. But we know that we're not in the business of providing those direct services. They are set up with case managers, with the staff, with the structure to know what people's needs are and evaluate that. So we're so grateful that we always have that partnership up front. And when COVID happened, we immediately were all in communication on this campaign piece. And yes, Linda shared the spotlight, the exciting news that we actually have decided to, or made the decision to start to allocate some of the dollars. I know as I've talked to my Federation colleagues around the country, we're all sort of in the same position of when is the right time to give out these dollars. And as the needs are still growing and changing, we just really don't know. But our Federation did make the decision last week to allocate some of the dollars. And so we're just grateful. And we know that we're turning it over to JFS to help, to help families in need in our community. And so as we look forward, we don't know how much we'll continue to raise for our COVID emergency appeal, but we know that we have other programs to turn back to and other partnerships that we can, continue to grow, such as Promise of Hope, to continue to meet the needs as we move forward. So I think that's it from us. Linda, unless you have something else to add.
Just grateful for the partnership.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Detroit. Thank you, Boca. I'd like to take just a minute or two If there are any questions, my colleague Darcy Hirsch, who is the network's Washington rep, may have some questions on her end. You should all feel free to put them into the chat. We are going to take a minute before we head over to Israel. I wanted to begin though with a question that I have, which has to do with the studies, and this is really for anybody. You can all make yourselves put your cameras on and join us back. I think each of you talked about studies that your communities have done, where you specifically looked at human service issues. Were those studies specifically or exclusively focused on human service needs? Were they embedded in broader community demographic studies where they also asked questions about Jewish education or how many times people light Shabbat candles, things of that sort? Could you speak to those studies? Because I think in many ways, whether or not it was noted, it seems to me like that data really helps to drive and inform what you do. So I throw it out to all of you. Talk about the studies and if they were specifically focused on human service related issues.
Ruben, if I can jump in.
Sure.
I'm happy to start. So our study in 2016 was focused exclusively on the needs of the community. It wasn't a segment of a population study or a segment of another story. But I think the impetus for how it started is important and maybe instructive. The funder who, for this particular study, who was in our building, we started talking about one of the challenges that we have at Federation, which is not always making data-driven decisions or making decisions based on what we hear from one person or two people or three people and just assume it's a trend. And so the study was certainly an effort to understand what human services were needed, but it was also meant to truly get out of that cycle of maybe making decisions that weren't really data-driven and may not be accurate. So it was that was a really big that was a main reason that we did it. And I think it's something that we all struggle with. We hear something a few times and think, oh, that's it. But until you really do a study, you truly don't know.
Yeah. And
I can jump.
You had a funding partner who
Correct.
supported that effort. Dana, I think you wanted to jump in.
Sure, happy to jump in from Florida here. So ours was not focused only on human services. Ours was a broader demographic study that looked at everything from, the demographics, geographical and age and social welfare and engagement and synagogue engagement, et cetera. So the human services part was just a section of it. It had been 10 years since we had done it, and it was time. And we actually found out some interesting things, trends that had changed in our community that have been very helpful to us thinking about the future and how we allocate our dollars and what we need to be paying attention to moving forward.
All right.
We also just participated in one with 10 other communities around the country. It was smaller and it was only based on COVID. So it was much more focused on human services, but it was, that was a subset that we just was recently.
Ruben, I can add that in Houston in 2015, we had a full-blown demographic study. I remember so clearly the year because that's when we had our Memorial Day flood, and we were able to jump in and add questions that had to do with the flooding and whether people plan to remain in the Houston area or whether they might leave. And so we did ask human service questions along with many other questions, and it really did help us learn about where populations of the Jewish community were living, and to give you a direct idea of how those numbers impacted us. We had identified 400 Jewish senior households in the Meyerland Southwest area of town, and we put together a new initiative in 2015 to reach out to them. It kicked off a month after the Memorial Day flood. And what happened is those seniors either went to high rises or left the city. And there was a bit, and we stopped the program that we were offering in that area as a result, because it changed the needs very quickly. So the survey helped us see that.
Okay, thank you. We do have a question that came through around allocation decisions. Specifically, how do you make allocation decisions strategically that focus on building structure and efficiency for continuing needs post-COVID, even at the expense of bulking up emergency response that will assumingly diminish post-COVID? So how are you beginning to think through your allocations process, understanding that COVID has had such a profound impact, not only on the human service sector, but on the full community? Are you thinking about doing allocations any differently because of this? Any thoughts around that?
Share a little bit what we just did in Houston.
Thank you.
Our regular allocations process, we pretty much move forward as we would usually do. We had a lot of things that did not need funding because they weren't happening right now, so they kind of took a back seat. But we really tried with our annual allocations to try to keep agencies best we could, because our campaign was down where they had been in the past, so we didn't have to make significant cuts on money they may be depending upon. In terms of our COVID allocations from that special emergency fund, our number one priority was human service needs. And that was very clear from the beginning. We also had two other priorities, which were Jewish continuity and institutions, supporting institutions in our community. So we took advice from different federations that had done different things. We were concerned if we opened up a grant process, we would get a lot of requests for amounts that we just couldn't meet. And we weren't sure, we couldn't advise them on how much to even apply for, because we knew that we had limited dollars that didn't meet the total sum needed in the whole community. So so we've been working with a scenario that would help try to allocate some dollars based on a scaled scenario to almost all of the Jewish organizations in our community, and some in categories that we don't typically fund in allocation, such as prioritizing early childhood programs that have been particularly hard hit. So that's kind of how we're looking at what we're doing here.
Ruben, I would say that for us, we're operating, I think, fortunately from a position of strength, having had campaigns that have been successful. We've been raising more money over the last few years. So we had been funding one-time urgent needs, and there was a bucket of those dollars that in this most recent cycle, we held on to those for future needs that may exist. We also have an emergency fund. So our agencies, not just ours, Jewish organizations, can apply for funding. It's a very simple form. It's a small group of people who make quick decisions. I think what we've come to realize is we don't know what's going to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years. Mm-hmm. So trying to have a conversation around that is sort of an exercise in futility in some respects. Certain things you may know, but if you try to get too far ahead of it, and I think as planners, we're always trying to figure out what is going to be in the short, medium, and long term. If you try to do that, you're gonna have some challenges. So we're funding things that we know exist today, trying to be planful as best we can, but understanding that we're not going to know. There's going to be variables that we just don't know.
Yeah, and I think if I could bring us all back to one of the other themes that flowed through each of your community presentations, the dynamic of trust and transparency. So for the agency to say, this is what we know today, but let me also share with you, I'm hearing from my other JFS colleagues nationally, this is what they're seeing. We may be seeing this soon as well, or this is what they're not seeing, or, et cetera. The opportunity for the agencies to share very openly what they're seeing, what they're not seeing, what the challenges are, and to not have that come back as, why don't you know what's going on, or how come you're not being more responsive? Having that trust and that transparency, I also think, allows everybody, federation and agencies, to find a way to be comfortable with the gray and the uncertainty of this time. And We talked about the hurricane in Houston. Certainly, there have been hurricanes in Florida as well. And there have been floods in Detroit. And so even communities that don't think they're going to have natural man-made challenges may actually, have, all kinds of weather disasters or all kinds of other crises and challenges. So being able to be nimble and flexible and feel comfortable with the gray, I think, is something that we're all starting to learn about and live with. So I want to remind everybody, continue to put questions in the Q&A. I am monitoring the clock, and I want to make sure we have time for our next presenter. I'm going to introduce Yossi Heyman, who is the CEO of the Eshel division of JDC Israel. JDC Israel is also a member agency of the Network of Jewish Human Service Agencies. Yossi is a good friend and colleague. Eshel provides a range of innovative services to support the needs of older adults in Israel. And while they don't necessarily have one federation that they work with, they do have collaborative models that they develop and they implement with a range of funding sources. And Yossi is going to share his perspective from Israel now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruben. In my presentation, I'll try to show you how we create collaboration in Israel between sectors, between the public sectors, the municipalities, and the social sector, and sometimes with the private sector. But not less important in my vision, it's to try to create a future cooperation between JDC Eshel and the Federation and Jewish organization in North America. I think we can learn and study a lot from each other. So let me share my presentation. First of all, I'm sure most of you, all of you know very well JDC Global. A few words about JDC Israel, which its vision is to strengthen the Israeli society capacity to care for all its people in order to close social gaps and promote resilience and social justice. JDC Eshel is one of the 5 divisions of JDC Israel, and we are the oldest one. Eshel was established in 1969, and we are a government partnership with the longest and widest expertise and reach in developing and implementing service for older adults in Israel. And our mission is to improve the well-being of vulnerable older adults in Israel by advancing their autonomy, functionality, and independence. What does it mean that we are partnership with the government, even though we are NGO? So our budget is more or less 50-50%. And in our board of directors, there are representatives from the Ministry of Health, Welfare, Finance, Social Equality, and the National Insurance Institute. A few words about the coronavirus situation in Israel. So Israel started in March in a very good way. The government decided to a first lockdown in the beginning of April until the middle of May. We succeed to flatten the curve for about 20 new cases every day. But then, as you can see, we have made as a nation a lot of mistakes. I'm not get into it now. And in the middle of September, we reached to a 6,000 new cases a day. And then the government decided about a second lockdown till it's rise to 9,000 cases a day. This lockdown took part till 2 weeks ago. Nowadays, we are in about 1,000 or 600 to 1,000 new cases a day, and I hope we'll succeed to flatten again the curve in the future. I want to share with you that before the pandemic started, we started to try to develop a dashboard, an Israeli dashboard for optimal aging. And why it's so important for collaboration and cooperation? Because if you have a mutual conversation and you agree about the measurement, it's bring in a better way the cooperation between all entities. So we studied from almost 100 researchers from all over the world, and this dashboard is a global comparison. Red, yellow, and green is a comparison to the OECD. And here you can see that we found that when we talk about optimal aging, we are talking about three main indicators, meaning health and economic resilience. And this level, the first level, declare the current average situation of the older adult in Israel. The second level stage is the predictive metrics of optimal aging, which is, we find it in four families: health management, healthy lifestyles, active lifestyles, and economic readiness, and digital literacy, which is a huge important element to succeed to push all those metrics. And we believe that if all the sectors in Israel adopt these metrics and try to improve the metrics and to move the needles, in the future, the average situation of the older adult in Israel is going to improve. And I offer you to have a conversation with us. I think we can study a lot from each other. I think it's a very important dashboard for optimal aging. We can be adopted all over the world. That's why I show it to you. For the first time, we took those, by the way, the government of Israel, I hope in a few weeks or months, is going to adopt this dashboard, and all the ministries in Israel should work to improve the parameters in things that they can influence in their activities. We, in addition, during the Corona, we took those metrics, we took those measurements, and we made a big survey, the effect of, which we asked the effect of the coronavirus on Israel older adult population. When we talk about older adult, we talk about 65 and above. And we did it during the second part of May. By the way, right today, we made the second survey, and we are going to publish the result in the next few days. Anyway, we made a big survey with more than 750 people with 36 items, questions from the dashboard that I showed, and many other questions that we have below the dashboard that I show you in Hebrew, Arabic, and Russian. And what we found that 44% of the older adult in Israel report that they didn't experience any significant decline during the coronavirus. But 56% of the older adult in Israel report that they suffer or from financial decline, from emotional decline, or from functional decline. As you can see, and in the next slide, you'll see it in a better way, that those who are sitting in the middle and suffer for 2 or 3 decline are in the worst situation. Again, this survey, which Eshel has made, help all the sector to focus their intervention and to have a mutual understanding about the situation in Israel. So just one slide about what we have found, and who is going to be spotlight to prevent decline during a crisis. So what we have found from the survey, that the risk predictors are financial issues. So it means that if you are more poor, your ability to suffer from the coronavirus is double many times. If you are in a nursing situation, decondition and pre-decondition, your potential to deteriorate from the coronavirus is much, much higher, and the Arab sector in Israel. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, the 7% of older adults who suffer for more than one problem are in the worst situation, and we have to try to help them. And on the other end, we found that the resilience predictor are digital literacy. It means if you have a digital literacy, your potential for deterioration is much, much, much less, and functionality independence. And at a very high risk, partners caring for older adults that require nursing care. Again, I'm not going to enter into too much details, but I can tell you that in our discussion with the government and with the municipality, just one example, the government of Israel asked us to initiate and to accelerate program for digital literacy for older adults or for the family caregivers who take care for people with nursing situation. Here are one slide, which I'm not going to enter into all our activities in JDC Eshel. I just marked here 4 areas which are in red, which are in potential for a future cooperation between the Federation or your organization and JDC Eshel. The first one is training videos. We we manufacture 21 training videos between 2 to 7 minutes, each of them for elderly, for caregivers, for family caregivers, and for professionals. 15 of them have subtitles in English, and we can share all of them with you. By the way, the NHJSA organization has all of them. So again, I offer you to get them, of course, for free. The second one is that we incubate activity kits for people who are in loneliness situation or in a functional decline, who are sitting more at home and don't move too much. So with occupational therapist, we created the specific activity kits. Again, here we translate it for English, and by the way, we provide 33,000 from those kits, which also later, but you can get the PDF of this idea and you can use it in your federation or organization. Remote rehabilitation. We have a big program in Israel, in JDC Eshel, for rehabilitation in the community, geriatric rehabilitation, public, in the community, which is in a very bad situation in Israel, even though the health system in Israel are pretty good. Of course, during the Corona time, we should close those centers, and we have studied that a lot of the rehabilitation can be supplied from distance, a remote rehabilitation. The nurse, the physiotherapist, the spiritual care, and even the speech therapist can operate from distance. And here again, we can share the knowledge that we have learned with you. And last thing, we're in the middle of a pilot with a remote monitoring and detection of functional decline. We work with a great startup company. Think about the situation that just connecting to your cell phone, of course, with your permission, we can define your functional and emotional situation, and if it needs, and if there are alerts, we can call to the family caregiver or a nurse or other to check with the older adult what is the problem. And we are now in the middle of, we started with 100 older adult, a pilot, and we are going to increase it in the next few months to 3,000 older adult. Last slide, one example for a partnership that we initiated in Israel and thanks for Globally Help. So the Ministry of Welfare, the beginning of the pandemic, started to supply 150,000 meals every day for, they did it twice a week, but they supplied for a daily use for older adult with a nursing situation or in poverty situation. And they did it in a cooperation with the local municipalities and volunteer organization. So we create what we call a flexible basket of services. In Israel, there are 256 municipalities. The biggest one is, of course, Jerusalem with 1 million people. There are some small with about 10,000 people. So we define, you know, or don't know that those municipalities have a priority between 1 to 10 in their socio-economical situation. Of course, Tel Aviv and Ra'anana are in 8 and 9. Most of the Arab cities are in 1 or 2. Jerusalem is in 2, so they are very poor. So we decided to give the flexible basket to the 140 municipalities in Israel, which are in the socio-economic for 1 to 5. It means the lowest one. So with Teva and with a great help and initiation from Schusterman Foundation, the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County, Glickman Family Foundation, big help from JFNA, the Jewish Community Federation of San Francisco, and Bader, Ruchlin, and Russell Berry and Hall Foundation. We enable those 140 municipality flexible money to enable those volunteer organization when they bring the food to the older adult who needs it, more services like if you need a repair for your glasses because it was broken and you cannot fix them, if you need a battery for your cell phone, if you need other small repair, it can enable the volunteer and the local municipality to enable the older adult. Again, we raise about $1.5 million from those organizations, and we made, I think, a very good partnership in Israel. And that is my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Yossi. I think I'm not muted. Okay. Thank you, Yossi. I wanted to, we did get a couple of questions that came through. And I know that you spoke very quickly. Could you just give a bit more detail about what's in the activity kits that you referenced?
Yeah. We found that a lot of the older adult, mainly the people with the nursing situation, because of the corona, they more stay at home, don't move, and it's deteriorates their cognition situation and their physical situation. So the kit bring you some instrument and some ideas to the professionals, how to move the people even a little bit, move their cognition and move their muscles when they are at home. And we even, when we bought the kits, we create the kits in Israel, it cost us about $15 per kit, but we have the PDF explain how to do it. It's cost us about $15, and it has some rubber balls and some stretch and some activities for the mind and to prevent deterioration of the deconditioning.
Right. So as Yossi referenced earlier, Yossi presented to the member agencies of the network probably maybe about 8 or 9 weeks ago, and did go into detail about the kits. And we have a PDF in terms of the specifics of what's inside the kits, And we also can make those available for anybody. And I'll make sure that JFNA has them so that you can have them with the recording of this session in terms of follow-up resources and materials. I will say that, you know, the JDC, being a member of our network, is certainly partnering with our agencies to bring their resources, and we're going back and forth sharing with each other. But that kind of knowledge sharing can absolutely and should absolutely be happening with your Federation partners as well. So whether you dial direct to Yossi at the JDC or you dial direct to your local human service agency that's part of the network, you can be connected to the resources of JDC and Eshel specifically. You know, the question is wondering whether or not those resources, the kits, et cetera, may also, and other resources of Eshel, might also be applicable for persons with disabilities who aren't necessarily the elderly. I'm wondering, I know that JDC has another division, Israel Unlimited, that focuses on persons with disabilities, but I'm wondering if there's been any sharing of the materials and resources between those two populations. Yossi, has there been some sharing between the two?
Yeah, first of all, I share my email because I saw that many participants ask for those kits.
Yes.
So as you said, they can get it from you, and the videos and all the other, they can directly make a contact with us. Yes, yep. JDC, I said that we are one of 5 divisions in JDC Eshel. One of the other division is Israel Unlimited, and we are working together. And if it needs, and I know most of you even deal not just with older adults, but a lot with people with disabilities, the same that we do with older adults, Israel Unlimited, JDC Israel Unlimited does with people with disabilities. And again, if you need any connection for Israel Unlimited, please chat me and I'll let you, I'll connect you to them.
Okay, thank you.
Ruben?
So, yep.
I just wondered if you would allow me, because one of the things that I didn't get to say earlier is that one of the earliest partnerships the Federation and JFS in Houston had was really what today is full-blown disability services. It didn't exist 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that our disability services did since COVID has been, they have been delivering these amazing work boxes to the homes of adults with disabilities who, you know, had places to go and things to do before. And in those boxes, in addition to actual work they got paid to do or continue to get paid to do, are also activities and art projects and things like that, combined with Zoom programming, 10 hours of Zoom programming a week to keep them connected and not isolated. And I think that that's, you know, something really concrete that has happened to respond to Linda's question.
Yep. Thank you, Linda. We do have another question, which isn't necessarily limited just to Yossi. Any of our presenters can address this. Have any of the communities seen an increase in situations related to domestic violence? Has the isolation, the lockdown led to more cases, more clinical cases, more issues related to domestic violence? If anyone has experiences with that.
Talk on that one.
Sure.
So ironically or not, I mean, unfortunately, because most of the victims are being forced to stay with their abusers, they had no access to make calls to hotlines. So right. We work closely in our community with a non-Jewish domestic violence organization, and conferring with them, we were both, you know, had the same result that during COVID actually, and it's only started to grow because now as things are freeing up a little bit, victims are able to get into a place where they can actually make a phone call and get services. So during COVID, when we were shut down, yes, more abuse was happening, but the victims were not in a place where they could actually make calls for help. And that we've seen nationally. And since they asked the question, I just want to make a plug. I'm on a work group with the Jewish Women's International, and we're doing a national survey of Jewish domestic abuse programs. So all the federations and Jewish family services that are out there that have domestic abuse programs, please, because some of the questions actually are these type of questions about COVID, please make sure your domestic abuse partners in your agencies or in your Jewish family services are taking and completing the survey so that it can influence planning moving forward.
Thank you.
Ruben, I just want to comment on that very briefly, Perry from Detroit. So, and it's a general comment that I have, and it's not just about intimate partner violence or any kind of abuse, but any kind of hurt that anybody has. I just want all of us to know that while the pandemic is exacerbating, of course, any of these hurts, I know or feel in my gut anyway, that for years after, God willing, there'll be a vaccine and everybody will be vaccinated and less, wearing masks. I know that our organizations and federations, et cetera, will be helping people for the next decade because this pandemic is going to have a huge tail. And part of that tail will be domestic violence and child abuse and suicidal ideation, et cetera. So let's not pretend that once there's a vaccine and we're vaccinated in a year, fill in the blank, whenever that is, that it's all good. This will have lasting impact on the whole system.
Yeah. I just want to really reinforce and echo that because we within the network of having some presentations really helping us to understand that we're all living through trauma. We're all traumatized. The disruptions surrounding the lockdown, the certainly in the US, the political environment, the issues surrounding racial justice, the economic uncertainties, all of this compounds the varying information around wear a mask, don't wear a mask, do this, don't do this, what's safe, what's not safe. All the uncertainty adds to anxiety, it adds to depression, it adds to confusion, and it adds to a sense that how are we ever going to get through this? So if there is a silver lining in all of this, I hope that you can take some comfort in the content of today's presentations, because the concept here was about open dialogue, about proactive planning, about communication between partners. And I think what you heard, particularly from Yossi's presentation, was also about innovation. And I think historically, traditionally, when agencies think about human service agencies, they don't think about them as places where innovation takes place, where you're thinking about using a piece of technology, or you're thinking about rethinking how you do what you do. But if the pandemic has taught us nothing, it's that we can all be involved with innovation. We've all been thrust into needing to be innovative because especially now you're in an innovative session, a virtual GA is certainly innovative. And so we're all finding our way through all of this. I want to remind everybody again, if there are any closing questions or comments, I do want to give all of our presenters just a couple of minutes for closing thoughts, and then I will share some closing thoughts as well. If anybody has anything that they'd like to say, share, respond, react to as a closing thought, please.
I'm happy to go, Ruben. I know that we often talk about it shouldn't be unusual, the partnership that we have all exhibited in our 3 communities. To me, that should be actually the rule and not the exception. And often I find that it is the exception. And what I want to encourage those who are participating and listening, and those who will listen to it later, that it starts with trust. And if trust doesn't exist, then each party needs to create that trust. We are delivering important basic human services to our communities. And when you look at it from a Jewish point of view, you know that you take care of yourself first and you expand out. And I think the Jewish Family Services stand there to be the family that many people in our communities don't have. And we can't be that family without the support of the Federation system. So I love my colleagues on this call because we have really terrific examples of how it works. And I hope that those communities that don't have this kind of example will be inspired by what they heard today to say, what can we do to change the trajectory? And I think COVID is your real opportunity. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. I couldn't have said it better myself. Anybody else, a closing comment before? Okay, so with that, Linda, really, truly, thank you. I want to close today's session with a special thank you to each of our presenters. Your focus on community is clear, and a reminder for all of us that we are here representing, as Linda said, those who typically are not at the communal planning table and those who may not have any family to care for them. But also I need to remind everybody that we're all impacted by the pandemic. And increasingly our agencies are serving the mainstream of the community. You could be sitting at a Federation planning allocations meeting with somebody who's lost their job or whose child is struggling with depression and anxiety because of the lockdown dynamics, or whose aging parent is really struggling significantly. This is a pandemic that has impacted us all. We also have colleagues in other nonprofit agencies in the Jewish community that are also struggling significantly. So the network, through its partner agencies, has been trying with JPRO and with JFNA to support Jewish communal professionals who've been laid off, to support Jewish community members who've been laid off, to support non-Jewish community members who've been laid off. The dynamic and the work before us is daunting. We can't do any of it, though, without open transparency, without clear communication, and without a commitment to work together. So as we close the session, I want to take us back to the beginning. I want to remind everybody about the covenant that we have to the focus on the rainbow, and with it, the understanding that the diversity of our community and the diversity that each of us as players in providing services to the community, each of the roles that we bring to the table, they're needed in order to move the community forward. That diversity gives us its strength. That diversity can be a powerful source of support and also grounding inspiration. So thank you all. Let's keep the dialogue going. We are here for you, email, virtually, by phone, one day in person. Thank you, JFNA, for having us. Thank you to all of our speakers, and be well and stay safe.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. This session is over.